All right, I'm going to do something that I've never done before. Never done it here, never done it anywhere. I know last week I also did something that I had never done before. It's not that drastic, I promise you. But I am going to, for the next 30 seconds or so, offer up something incredibly valuable to all of you. Well, hopefully for the next 30 minutes or so, I'm going to offer up something valuable. But this is a different kind of value. I'm going to offer to anyone who would like it, who can get up here quickly enough, my autograph. Oh, we've got one. There we go. Did somebody prepare you for this? Oh, she was just walking in. Look at that. That makes me feel so special. There we go. It used to be a lot prettier, but then I started buying houses, and it got worse. There you go. Yeah. Oh, that's your annual report. Even better. Anyone else? Going once. Wow, this is hurtful. Going twice. And a half. No one else. All right, well, hey, you made my day. It's all right. Time's up. I cannot imagine why nobody in here wanted my autograph. You hear me speak every single week almost, and yet you still, what if my autograph was going to be worth something? Would anybody then want to come up and get my autograph? Anyone? If it was like, hey, I could turn around and I could sell that thing. She's banking on that someday I'm going to write a book. I'm not, probably. She's banking I'm going to write a book. There was, just so you all know, there was a brief moment where I traveled in a band. And we sang all over this. Now, it was a Southern Gospel quartet. And we sang in nothing but Church of Gods around the nation, never on a big platform. But still, I was in a band, people. And my wife likes to say it was a boy band because we were all boys. But I was still in it, so you missed your opportunity. Now imagine if Michael Jordan was up here, and Michael Jordan said, for the next 30 seconds, anyone who can get up here can have my autograph. Would anybody want to come up and get Michael Jordan's autograph, quickly? Yeah, there's a few hands going up at that point. Why? Because Michael Jordan is a known quantity, and we know that autograph is worth something. Do we not? We know that we can turn around and we can sell that puppy if we decide not to keep it, and it'll be worth something, especially if he signs a picture of himself. Now, that was my original plan, was I was going to have pictures of myself up here, and I was going to have you sign those. If you would like a signed autograph of Nick Sims, you can go to the youth room. His pictures are all over the place, and he can sign those, and you can take one of those home. It reminds me a little bit of way back in college, again, about the same time that I was in that boy band, where I got Southern Gospel Quartet, where I had the opportunity to meet a comedian by the name of Mark Lowry. And I got to, kind of sit backstage with Mark and share jokes with him, and he acted like my jokes were funny. I'm sure he was thinking, I get this from everybody that I meet. They try and tell me something, and they think it's hilarious, and it's really not. But the truth is, 20 years later, there's probably a good portion of you sitting in here that are like, who in the world is Mark Lowry? Yeah, we got a few hands. They're like, yep, I didn't even ask for hands on that one, and I'm still getting hands like I have no idea who he is. What if we fast forwarded 20 years and we said someone like Nate Bargatze or Jim Gaffigan or Kevin Hart, comedians that we've actually heard of, and I started to tell you a story about getting to meet one of those guys and getting to swap jokes with one of them. Chances are, now while that still might not be enough to pique your interest, because maybe you don't care about comedy, maybe you're just not a funny person. I don't know. Or maybe you just don't care about meeting celebrities. I have no idea. I really, personally, it's not a big deal to me to meet somebody who's on TV or whatever. But it would probably pique some interest a little bit more if it was a name that we had heard of. Because what it really comes down to, at least what I think it comes down to, is we have this hesitancy to care about people that we have no idea who they are. Not as in I don't care about, their life being rough or anything like that. We don't know the individuals living in LA, but we still care about the individuals living in LA. I'm not talking about that kind of care. But as in listening to what they have to say and hanging on their every word, or being super excited to see somebody that we've never heard of It's not generally someone that we're going to be like, oh, that's awesome. Like if I stood up here and I gave you some obscure name that's going to come in here and speak next week, it probably wouldn't be something to be like, I got to make sure that I'm there because somebody that I have no idea who this person is going to be here next week to speak. The question, in my mind anyway, comes down to why would we care if someone is serious if we don't know who they are? I've kind of presented that to you for the past couple of weeks, that we're going to spend some time this year kind of looking at the words that Jesus says, and we're going to ask ourselves, why was he serious? When he said these things, was he serious? But this morning I want us to back up just a little bit, and I want us to kind of look at how was Jesus able to sell himself? How was he able to convince anybody that they should take him seriously? And we're going to start by looking in three different places in Matthew chapter 16, Luke chapter 9, and Mark chapter 8. I'm going to take all three of these places and I'm going to summarize them into a couple of statements, a couple of verses. So if you look up Matthew 16, 13 through 14, you'll find a version of this. Luke 9, 18 through 20, you'll find a version of this. Look up Mark 8, you'll find a version of this. But if you look at the three different gospel accounts, it's a slightly different wording in it. So we've kind of put them together so the whole story is there. They don't disagree with one another. They just each have a little bit of a different piece of the interaction that happened here. So this is what happened. When Jesus came to the region of Caesarea Philippi, he asked his disciples in private, "Who do people say that I am?" And they answered, "Some say John the Baptist, others Elijah, still others Jeremiah, or that one of the ancient prophets has come back." Now I want us to stop at that point because I want us to stop and really consider, why would the crowds say this? You know, it doesn't say that a couple of people have said this, but this is what people around us are saying. This is what the crowds are saying about you, that you are John the Baptist reincarnated, or you are Elijah reincarnated, or still others say you are Jeremiah reincarnated, or that one of the ancient prophets has come back reincarnated. It's kind of, to our culture in today, in 2025, I almost said 2024, we are in 2025, people. In 2025, this idea of reincarnation isn't nearly as popular and as widespread as it was back then, but I want us to stop and consider, why would they say these people? And first, I want to give you a little bit of a Bible history quiz in order for us to really go back. If I were to stand up here and describe this person to you, I'd love to know who you would say this person is. This person fed many people with a few loaves and had more to spare. This person healed a leper. This person gave sight to the blind. This person fed the hungry. And this person was betrayed for money. I hear Jesus. Any others? Who says Jesus? That was Elisha. Oh, no. All right, this person preached repentance to Gentiles, knew that salvation belongs to the Lord, slept on a boat during a storm, spoke and power of God calmed the storm, sacrificed himself for others, spent 3 days in darkness, left for dead, and after 3 days escaped death and taught for 40 days. Who would you say that is? Without thinking that I'm trying to trap you, who would say Jesus? That was Jonah. Oh, now you're putting the pieces together. It's like, oh yeah, it's the same thing I did. Don't worry. I'm not faulting you for that. I read those and I went, oh yeah, that is who that was. Sure enough. Okay, I'll give you one more, maybe two more. As a baby, this person escaped the decree of the king to put baby boys to death. Lived in Egypt as a child, but later he returned to his homeland. He was known to be both humble and strong. He was tempted in the wilderness. Hey, I'm not done yet, people. You're those people in class who interrupt the teacher, aren't you? Fun fact, I had a teacher give us a test one time, and he said, read all the directions. And sure enough, of course I didn't read all the directions. So I took the entire quiz, and I turned it back in. And I was sitting there wondering, how did everyone else in class get done so much quicker than I did? Well, it turns out the last instruction was, don't do any of the questions, just turn in the paper as it is. I didn't. Okay, back to this person. Performed signs and wonders, worked a miracle at sea, miraculously fed thousands of people with bread, spoke God's word, and taught God's law from a mountain. He was the mediator between God and his people. Now, again, if you didn't think that I was giving you a trick question, who would you say that was? Yes, Moses, because you think I'm giving you a trick question. I still think a lot of you would have said Jesus. Maybe some of you would have gotten to Moses. One more. This is the last one, I promise. Again, not a trick question. He was a descendant of Abraham and of the tribe of Judah. He was born in Bethlehem. He came from an unlikely social position. He was anointed by God to lead his people. He was both a shepherd and a king. He amazed elders as a young man. He spent time in the wilderness. He had no place to lay his head, also known as he was homeless. His popularity angered the leadership of the day. He was betrayed by those that he served, and he trusted God in the face of adversity. Who would you say that that man is? David. That was right. But how many of those could have also described Jesus? All of them could have also described Jesus. And so as the crowds are saying, you are one of these people reincarnated, look at all the parallels that they would have been making. Essentially, what the crowds were saying is, we're following the crowds of our day. Because while Jesus is saying one thing, what they're saying and what they're hearing is the same thing that they're hearing from the culture all around them. They lived in a culture where reincarnation was a leading belief system, that gods would be reincarnated and they would come back and they would live as another human, and they would just keep doing this on cycle. And so the crowds have adopted this belief of the world that is all around them. Even the Jewish and Israelite crowds have adopted these beliefs of the world that is all around them. They also are saying that we view Jesus as someone incredibly special. Because while they may have totally missed who he was, all of those people were vital people in the history of Israel and of the world. Elijah, considered one of the greatest prophets. Jeremiah, one of the greatest prophets. John the Baptist, a forerunner to the Messiah coming. The voice crying out in the wilderness. John the Baptist had many disciples. Before Jesus came on the scene, people would come and they would listen to John the Baptist and they would follow John the Baptist. And then when John the Baptist was murdered, many of those people, and some before, but many of them started to follow Jesus. And some of them thought that this was actually John the Baptist's spirit had come back and was now in Jesus. So they believed, the crowds did, that Jesus was the one preparing the way for the Messiah, as John the Baptist was described. They believed that he was Elijah, that he was one of the greatest of the prophets who prepared the way, was a forerunner of the Messiah. They believed that he was Jeremiah, who was described as a forerunner of the Messiah. So what they were saying was, we believe that this Jesus is telling us that the Messiah is about to come. That this Jesus is the preview of the Messiah. The crowds are also declaring that they have a strong belief in the supernatural. That they have a strong belief in a higher power, which was also an adoption somewhat of the world that was all around them. And yes, some of their history as well. I mean, they believed in one God. Jewish people, Israelite people were monotheists. There is one God. There is not all these, there's one God above all the gods, I should say. But they lived in a place, and it's important to consider where this happened when it says it was in Caesarea Philippi. This was a place that in the near walking vicinity of it would have had at least 14 temples to the god Baal. 14 different places. Now consider walking through a downtown, especially a small town America, where you can walk through and you can come along 14 churches in about a 3-block radius, it feels sometimes. In Oklahoma City, we felt honestly that you could come across 14 Baptist churches in a 3-mile radius. I mean, everywhere you went, there was a church. Well, in this culture, everywhere you went, there was a temple to the god Baal. And so the belief in this higher power, the belief in gods, was prevalent all around them. There was also nearby the birthplace, it was considered to be, of the god Pan, who was the god of nature, just a stone's throw away. A belief in a higher power that they're declaring. And also, right there in Caesarea Philippi, there was a big, huge, beautiful, white marble temple that had been built by Herod, who was someone who was a Jew, someone who would have declared anyway that he followed God, but this temple was built to the Godhead of Caesar himself. See, it wasn't uncommon belief in that day that God would come and he would walk amongst. It just was the wrong God that they were often believing was walking amongst the people. And so as Jesus asked this question, who do the people say that I am? Peter gives an answer, the disciples give an answer that reflects what the crowds believe, and we see that the crowds have adopted the beliefs of the world that is all around them. And really, the Jewish people at this point aren't all that distinguishable in their beliefs. Now, maybe in some of their practices, they're distinguishable. I mean, they're still following the cleanliness rituals, and they're not eating certain foods, and they're gathering on certain days. But as far as their true beliefs and their motivations behind all of it, it's not all that different from the people all around them. And so Jesus asked this question, trying to get an idea, okay, are we getting anywhere here? But then he makes the question just a little bit more pointed when he looks at them and he says, but you, who do you say that I am? Now I know what I heard you say, the crowd say, but who do you say that I am? And Peter answered, you are the Messiah, the Son of the living God. Now hear the distinction there. You are the Messiah. Remember, the crowds said that you are the forerunner, you are the preview, you are the one preparing the way for, yes, you're connected to the Messiah. You're an important person. You're one of these prophets that has come back from the dead to walk amongst us. Like, we don't look at you as nothing, but we don't see you as the Messiah. Whereas Peter looks at him and answers him and says, no, you are the Messiah. Now, Jesus didn't ask this question because he was ignorant of what the crowds were saying about him. And he didn't ask the question because he was conceited or vain or just needed some reassurance from what his followers. He wasn't looking for compliments from all of his followers as he asked this. What he was asking them is, are you sticking to the conventional wisdom of the crowds? Have you adopted the belief of all of those who are around you? You've walked with me. You've heard my teaching. You've seen the things that I've done. You say that you follow me, but I need to know, have you adopted what everyone else is saying about me? Or do you personally know who I am? Do you, not do the crowds, do you really know me? He wasn't fishing for different thoughts. He was asking point blank, do you know who I am? Because I am the Messiah. And unless you're convinced of this, then all of this stuff that we've done and all this stuff we're going to do, it's gonna keep falling on deaf ears, and it's gonna die. It's gonna die with me. But he point blank asked them, do you know who I am? And as Peter looks at him and says, you are the Messiah, Jesus responds to him, Simon, son of Jonah, you are blessed because flesh and blood, also known as the crowds, did not reveal this to you, but my Father in heaven revealed this to you. Once the disciples had answered this correctly, we begin to see Jesus start to just reveal more and more to them that there is a blessing that has fallen on their life, that when he asked them this question, do you know who I am? And they answer it correctly, things begin to open up for them. Now, does he still do a lot of things and say a lot of things that they completely miss? Absolutely. When they say he's the Messiah, do they still understand what in the world that means that he's the Messiah? Absolutely not. They still think that he's coming to lead a revolution through military means. They haven't caught on yet as to what that means, but what they do understand is that he is indeed the Messiah, that he is the Son of Man that is spoken about. He is the Son of God. What they thought about Jesus mattered. And what we think about when we think about Jesus matters. Who we believe that he is going to absolutely determine how serious we take him. I mean, just think about the different people that you do listen to. Think about whether it be a politician or a celebrity or whoever it might be. When you know who they are, when you've heard them speak more, you begin to take them more seriously. What you think about them determines how serious you take them. 8 years ago, I remember it, sometimes it feels like it was yesterday. I remember what it felt like when Donald Trump came onto the scene and put his name into the Republican pool. And everyone went, there is no chance, and some people use some language there, there is no chance that this man will ever be president. He ran a reality TV show, people. There's no way. And then, and truthfully, most of the Republican Party felt that way. Most of the United States seemed to feel that way. Do you remember? Think back 8 years ago when he first started running and everyone's going, yeah, this is a fun little sideshow, but surely not. Surely he's not going to make it in. And then he began to win people over. He began to convince people that he could do the job. He began to convince people that he was the right person to be the president, to lead America back to where it needs to be or forward to where it needs to be, depending on which way you want to say it. People started jumping on board, but they didn't at first. What they thought about him absolutely mattered as to how serious they were going to take him. And a lot of people changed how they thought about Donald Trump over the course of the past 8 years, 9 years-ish, whatever it is. What we think about Jesus is going to determine how serious we're going to take him. If we think that he was just a man who taught some really good things, then we're going to pick and choose from the things that he said and be like, I like that one, I don't like that one, so I'm not going to listen to that one, but I'll listen to that one. But if we are convinced that he is the Messiah, if we are convinced that he is God, not just we say that he is God, not just we say that he rose from the dead, but we actually believe that, then we're going to take his words seriously. And we're going to want to know what those words are. What we think about when we think about Jesus determines just how much we're going to trust him. Now think about it when, I mentioned at the beginning of this, that if I introduced that somebody was going to come up here and they were going to speak next week, and I didn't give you any background about who this person was. I mean, for all you know, this could be Joe Blow from the street in somewhere. I mean, just some random dude that I found or random woman that I found and said, they're going to come in, they're going to speak. You're going to be a lot less likely to listen to what they have to say than if I come up here and say, hey, we're going to invite next week, and some of you will recognize this name, some of you won't. We're going to invite next week J. Warner Wallace to come in here and to speak to us. J. Warner Wallace is considered to be the premier cold case detective in the United States. He has appeared on Dateline more than any other cold case detective in history to talk about the cases that he has solved out in the Los Angeles area. J. Warner Wallace is also an apologetics apologician. I actually don't know what you call those people. But anyway, he's someone who's really involved in apologetics. He's written several books, and you can go and you can read them. He's written Cold Case Christianity. He's written God's Crime Scene. He's written Person of Interest, that are laying out, using the tools and the methods that he uses for cold cases. He uses these same methods to discover what we can about Jesus and his resurrection, is not whether or not he really lived and whether or not God is real in the first place. Using all of these tools to present a convincing, I believe anyway, presentation that God is real, that Jesus was real, that Jesus said what he said, that Jesus went to a cross, he died, he rose again, and he still lives. Now, which of those two descriptions of somebody coming in are going to make you more likely to want to listen and take seriously what the person says when they get up here? Probably the second one, where I present the credentials of the person, where I give you a reason to trust. And now it's still going to be your choice. If you've read his stuff or you've watched him, you're going to be, I would think anyway, more likely to trust him. If you've still never heard of him, then you're going to be less likely. But you'll probably be more likely with me giving his credentials in front of you than just saying some random dude is going to be here next week and he's going to speak and I hope you listen to what he says. I mean, I hope that you trust me, at least a little bit, but shoot, I wouldn't even fully trust the person when they came in if that's all the pastor said to introduce them. What we think about somebody determines how much we trust them. And what we think about Jesus determines how much we trust him. And it also determines whether or not we find him somebody worth following. We spent extensive time last year walking through the invitation that Jesus gave us to follow him and what that meant, what the sacrifices were going to be when we follow him, what we will give up, but even more so what we will gain when we choose to follow him. But again, if we think that he died on that cross and he was never resurrected, then it's going to drastically change how much we want to follow him now. Or if we don't think that he was ever God in the first place, it's going to drastically change whether or not we want to truly follow him now, how seriously we will take him now. What we think about somebody determines whether or not we find them worth following. But I will give a couple of caveats to this. If somebody stands up and they say all the stuff that we already agree with and that we already want them to say, we have a tendency as our human nature to be like, that person is incredibly intelligent. You know why? Because they said all the stuff that we were already thinking, and we generally think of ourselves as pretty smart. We generally think of ourselves, myself included, as a little bit smarter than we really are. If you want any proof for this whatsoever, go and find any major social media influencer that you can find, not on TikTok, but, okay, I was just wondering how many people knew that no more TikTok in the United States. Personally, excited. But anyway, go and find any random social media influencer, see how many followers they have, and then go and look up what their education background is. And ask yourself, if they didn't have 1 million followers on Facebook and they weren't saying exactly what I want them to say in the first place, and I just looked at their credentials, would I buy a word of what this person is saying? Or any celebrity that we tend to just take their word for it because they're rich and famous. Why wouldn't we listen to what they have to say? Go and look at their educational backgrounds. And the people who are telling us what the political landscape of our country should look like, go and look and see how many of them have any kind of background in any kind of political studies. We tend to listen to somebody who we don't know as long as they're saying whatever it is that we want them to say. Or as long as somebody in our life that we trust has told them that they are worth listening to. Now, that could be for social media people. That could be for someone a lot more local. I mean, I can't tell you how many lunches, I've only lived here 4.5 years. I can't tell you how many times I've gone to a lunch and someone has said, hey, here's a little bit of who this person is. I'm not talking like the gossipy stuff, like here's what they did when they were 10 years old and this is why you should or should not take them seriously. I'm talking about like, hey, this is what they do for a living and this is, they've got this number of kids, whatever. That kind of background stuff. But if it's somebody that I trust, I'm going to be more likely to listen to what the person in front of me has to say and come in with less skepticism. So there are some caveats to this. But in general, It comes down to what we think about the person as to whether or not we're going to listen to them, and especially if they're going to change our mind. And consider how many minds Jesus changed. Not all of them, by any means. I mean, he was put on a cross for a reason. But after he died, and after he rose, this thing that we call Christianity started. And millions of people have chosen to follow Jesus, going against the norm, going against the crowds, going against the culture. What was it about Jesus that would make it worth taking him seriously? What was it about him that would change somebody's mind from everything that they had been taught? Why would you, why would I, why would anyone take Jesus serious if they didn't know who he is? And I think, anyway, the answer is we wouldn't. I think sometimes, and this is where it gets tough, sometimes that's why we don't. We say we know him, and we say we follow him. But do we take his words seriously, or do we just listen to the crowd that's all around us? When he tells us what it's going to be like to follow him, how often do we try and fit the worldly perspective of what life is supposed to look like into the plan that Jesus has for us? You know, God, I want to give you everything. I want to surrender everything to you. It's just what we talked about last week. But we're gonna need to put this inside of it. We're going to need to make sure that my family's taken care of, God. We're going to need to make sure that I've got clothes on my back. We're going to need to make sure that I've got a home. We're going to need to make sure that I'll never have to move away from here. We're going to need to make sure that I've got the right education that I want. We're going to need to make sure that my career doesn't change. God, as long as we can do all of those things, then I'll follow you. I think what that illustrates to us is that we don't fully know who he is. Because if we really knew him, then we would take him seriously at everything he said when he said that you need to die to self every single day. You need to pick up your cross every single day if you're going to follow me. That there is a great cost to following me. But oh, the gain is so much more. He doesn't downplay it. He doesn't say, hey, when you get up and you tell people about me, try and make it sound a little bit more rosy than it is. He says, no. When you tell people about me, when you're making disciples, I want you to tell them what it really means to follow me. Because why would anybody build a house and not count the cost ahead of time? But do we take him seriously even in that? Now, I used to reference my time in youth ministry a lot more than I do today, but I'm going to go back and I'm going to reference that again. As a youth pastor, I can tell you that I tried to gloss over the cost a lot. Because why would any teenager want to give up what it is that God says you're going to give up? When they are surrounded by a world that is telling them that those are the only things that matter. When their parents are telling them this is the only thing that matters. When their grandparents, when their friends, when their teachers, when everywhere they go, this is the only thing that matters. Well, I got to make sure that I tell them this in a way that they don't think that they might actually have to really give those things up. Because really, God doesn't ask most of us to give those things up. And we try to make it rosy, but the reality is, Jesus says, when you follow me, you die to self. Pick up your cross every single day. And the reward for that is a life that only I can give. Church, if we don't know Jesus, why in the world would we take him seriously? And if we don't know Jesus, why in the world would the world take him seriously? Why would the crowds ever change their minds? You're not going to get to know Jesus in an hour on Sunday mornings. You're not going to get to know Jesus in an hour on Sunday mornings and 2 hours in small groups. You're not going to get to know Jesus in an hour on Sunday morning and 2 hours in small groups and 15 minutes reading your Bible every morning. You're going to get to know Jesus by walking step in step with him all day, every day. Where every decision that you make, every post that you're about ready to make, you ask yourself, does this line up with what Jesus taught? Am I really taking him seriously at his words right now, or am I putting myself in front of him? And eventually, as we get to know him, we start to look like him, and we start to act like him. And those questions and those moments of pondering that become easier and quicker. But only if we take the time to get to know him first. In Hebrews chapter 6 and verse 1, and I'll end with this. The writer of Hebrews says, "Therefore, let us move beyond the elementary teachings about Christ and be taken forward to maturity." The world has a lot to say about Jesus, and the church has a lot to say about Jesus. But it is the responsibility of each and every one of us to get to know Jesus, to not listen to what the crowds say, but to move beyond the elementary surface level teachings about Jesus and to truly get to know him, to be taken forward into maturity. Church, I invite you this morning to ask that question for yourself. Who do I say that Jesus is? And not just who would I say he is if Pastor Justin came and asked me, but who do I really say that Jesus is? God, I'm thankful for the interactions that we have between you and your followers 2,000 years ago. We know they're not all written down. I still would have loved to have been in a room just to see how you guys shared meals together or what you talked about on all those other times you were walking along a road. But I'm so thankful for the ones that we have, and I'm so thankful for this one as a reminder to us that we are going to hear so much about who you are. But that when you look at us, you don't want to know what we say the crowds think about you. You want to know what we think about you. God, my prayer today, tomorrow, this week, this year, is that we would indeed move past an elementary level of understanding as to who you are, but that we would instead enter into deep, deep relationship with you. Much like a young person who goes from meeting the one that they're going to marry and barely knowing anything about them to moving to that point of entering into the deepest intimacy that we know as humans. God, may our relationships be that way with you. Amen.
Justin, I'm going to say something if that's okay. We're called to confess, right? We were learning about that in small group, and we read John Mark Comer's book, Practicing the Way, right? Practicing the Way. And as we were rehearsing this song this morning, the words of the song really convicted me because it's talking about us doing the outlandish things that Jesus did, like when someone curses him and you bless them, someone hates you, you love them. And I thought, I can't really sing those words honestly because I don't always do that, if I'm to be honest. And I was convicted. I thought, I don't, you've heard it said, I'm sure, that Christians don't tell lies, they sing them. I didn't want to do that. So if you're like me this morning and you're feeling convicted, maybe you don't know the words of this song, but you'll hear them. Make it your resolution today for these words to be true. And pray for me and for yourself as you try to follow Jesus' way.
You can stand with us if you'd like. Altars are open.